illuminate the town. Then the Gurns came. They poured out through the airlock and down the ramp, there to form in columns that marched forward as still more Gurns hurried down the ramp behind them. The searchlights gleamed on their battle helmets and on the blades of the bayonets affixed to their rifle-like long-range blasters. Hand blasters and grenades hung from their belts, together with stubby flame guns. They were a solid mass reaching halfway to the stockade before the last of them, the commanding officers, appeared. One of them stopped at the foot of the ramp to watch the advance of the punitive force and give the frightened but faithful Tip the first words to transmit to Freckles. "The full force is on its way, Commander." A reply came in Freckles' simulation of the metallic tones of a communicator. "The key numbers of the confiscated blasters have been checked, and the disturbance rays of the master integrator set. You'll probably have few natives left alive to take as prisoners after those 13 charges explode, but continue with a mopping-up job that the survivors will never forget." So the Gurns could, by remote control, set the total charges of stolen blasters to explode upon touching the firing stud? It was something new since the days of the old ones. He called Chiara and the other groups quickly to tell them what he had learned. "We'll get more blasters, ones they can't know the numbers of, when we attack," he finished. He took the blaster from his belt and laid it on the ground. The front ranks of the Gurns were almost to the wall by then, a column wider than the gap that had been blasted through it, coming with silent purposefulness. 2 blaster beams lanced down from the turrets to smash at the wall. Dust billowed and thunder rumbled as they swept along. A full 300 feet of the wall had been destroyed when they stopped, and the dust hid the ship and made dim glows of the searchlights. It had no doubt been intended to impress them with the might of the Gurns, but in doing so it hid the Ragnarok forces from the advancing Gurns for a few seconds. "Jim, black out their lights before the dust clears," he called. "Joe, the horn, we attack now." The first longbow arrow struck a searchlight, and its glow grew dimmer as the arrow's burden, a thin tube of thick lance-tree ink, splattered against it. Another followed. Then the horn rang out, harsh and commanding, and in the distance a unicorn screamed in answer. The savage cry of a prowler came, like a sound to match, and the attack was on. He ran with Fenrir beside him, and to his left and right ran the others with their prowlers. The lead groups converged as they went through the wide gap in the wall. They ran on into the dust cloud, and the shadowy forms of the Gurns were suddenly before them. A blaster beam cut into them, and a Gurn shouted, "The natives!" Other beams sprang into life, winking like pale blue eyes through the dust and killing all they touched. The beams dropped as the first volley of arrows tore through the massed front ranks, to be replaced by others. They charged on, into the blue winking of the blasters and the red lances of the flame guns, with the crossbows rattling and strumming in answer. The prowlers lunged and fought beside them and ahead of them. Black hell creatures that struck the Gurns too swiftly for blasters to find before throats were torn out. The sound of battle turned into a confusion of raging snarls, frantic shouts, and dying screams. A prowler shot past him to join Fenrir, Segan, and he felt Tip dart up to his shoulder. He made a sound of greeting in passing, a sound that was gone as her jaws closed on a Gurn. The dust cloud cleared a little, and the searchlights looked down on the scene. No longer brilliantly white, but shining through the red-black lance-tree ink as a blood-red glow. A searchlight turret slid shut and opened a moment later, the light wiped clean. The longbows immediately transformed it into a red glow. The beam of one of the turret blasters stabbed down, to blaze a trail of death through the battle. It ceased as its own light revealed to the Gurn commander that the Ragnarok forces were so intermixed with the Gurn forces that he was killing more Gurns than Ragnarok men. By then, the fighting was so hand-to-hand that knives were better than crossbows. The Gurns fell like harvested corn. too slow and awkward to use their bayonets against the faster Ragnarok men, and killing as many of one another as men when they tried to use their blasters and flame guns. From the rear there came the command of a Gurn officer, shouted high and thin above the sound of battle. "Back to the ship! Leave the natives for the ship's blasters to kill!" The unicorns arrived then to cut off their retreat. End of episode 11.